Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and we've got a Diablo 4 patch coming out next week that is gonna shut up a lot of my complaining. That is after we've had a few days of sorceresses doing literally infinite damage. We'll talk about Diablo 4 news, but we'll also cover Path of Exile 2 setting a date for its next big update, as well as possibly the biggest gaming drama of the year, with the publishers and founders of Subnautica going at each other and airing out their dirty laundry. We're talking lawsuits, firings, public statements with direct accusations, and somewhere in the middle of it, there's a Christmas movie with AI generation. We've also got an update on the Stop Killing Games initiative. We spoke about that last week, with a mysterious entity with a very authoritative name of Video Games Europe pushing back against the initiative, claiming that Stop Killing Games would basically be killing games. As always, I'll be breaking it all down, topic by topic. You can find timestamps in the description below, and do be sure to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday morning news episodes. But before we get deeper into Diablo, let's talk about a game that has one of Diablo's most requested features, fishing. We're talking about this video's sponsor, Isekai Slow Life. You ever have one of those days where you just want to run away from your responsibilities and start a new life? Well, now you can, except you're a mushroom. Yeah. In Isekai Slow Life, you get isekai'd classic anime style and wake up as a tiny mushroom person in a fantasy world. But instead of slaying demons or saving the world, your job is to build a peaceful life from scratch. You're managing a town, you've got a restaurant, a farm, a workshop, even a hot spring. You can fish, cook, run shops, and gradually grow your little community into a thriving fantasy village. It's simulation meets slice of life. Now, this being anime, yes, you meet a lot of beautiful and bizarre characters, and instead of just collecting them, you build actual relationships with them. Think daily interactions, bonding events, and unlockable storylines. There's even a full-blown million-word narrative packed with charming dialogue, unusual customs, and unexpected humor. If you ever wanted the relaxing vibe of Stardew Valley, the eccentricity of an anime isekai, and the personality of a mushroom, well, you're gonna love this. Download Isekai Slow Life using my link below to support the channel, and make sure to redeem the gift code MUSHRUM, that's MUSHRUM, and you'll get 10 free item draws right off the bat. It's available on iOS and Android. Try it out, build your mushroom empire, and live the slow life. Alright, starting off with some Diablo news. A new infinite damage bug? Yeah, a new one, because we've had some before. But a new one was discovered this season. It has since been patched, thankfully, but Hydra Sorcerers were temporarily hitting pit level 150, which is otherwise impossible to achieve. The bugged interaction involved the Sorcerer's Enlightenment Key passive getting turbo buffed by the seasonal infusion jewel whenever you'd go through a portal while under the enlightened state. So you can just keep going back and forth through portals to trigger this as many times as you want, theoretically stacking up to infinity. Again, the devs did fix this earlier in the week, and I got my top 10 Season 9 builds video that I posted right after the bug fix. Do check it out to see where the Sorcerer Hydra build lands now. So with the dust of Season 9 settling, I'm seeing it growing on people who actually gave it a chance, particularly the Nightmare Dungeon changes, the Escalating Nightmares, and the Astaroth fight. But there's always room for improvement. One issue with the Escalating Nightmare Dungeons, it feels like they ought to carry their affixes from one dungeon to the next, but they seem to not do that. I mean, sometimes they do, but it could just be that it's random, because it just seems to randomly reroll new affixes. So Dungeon 1, right, has 1 positive, 1 negative affix. Dungeon 2 has 2 positive, 2 negative. Dungeon 3 has 3 positive, 3 negative. But they don't carry forward. You don't see that same positive affix in the first dungeon, in the second, and then in the third, and they're just adding new ones. It seems like they're just re-rolling them every time. I think most people assumed they would carry forward rather than re-roll, but what do you folks think? Does it feel better to carry the affixes forward, or does it feel better to have random ones each time? Oh, by the way, folks, strong rooms give like 2,000 masterworking materials, so they're actually an excellent source of obdicite. Now, every season, I do continue to see people ask, why do we have to farm up the waypoints again every season? Or at least, why do we have to farm them on every character every season? I do think at least, once per season is enough. Once per character it's a bit silly. Some people even ask for strongholds to carry over, but we use strongholds as a pretty strong leveling tool. I don't think it's a good idea to remove those as a leveling option. Strongholds are also some of the best content in the game. We don't do them very often. If they're just always unlocked, we never get to repeat that pretty solid content. Like finding a waypoint, that's not content, right? There's no challenge, there's no gameplay in that. Now, I've seen complaints about tethering chains this season. They have become very common. They've been in the game since launch, but they become very, very, very common this season. And my initial reaction to them was to find them annoying. But then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, well, at least it's not a hard crowd control that stops us from playing the game, right? Like being completely frozen. And on a ranged character, I'm still able to move and attack. I'm just tethered within a certain region, so, you know, I can't move beyond that region, but I could run around inside that region. And I think that's actually a pretty acceptable crowd control. It's an obstacle to deal with. It's not just you stop playing the game for a few seconds kind of effect. Now, for melee characters, it must be more annoying. Maybe we need to increase the amount of counterplay that melee characters have as options to break free. Because, I mean, there's never any kind of crowd control that players will find fun, right? It's always going to be annoying, but dealing with challenges and overcoming obstacles is what games are about. I think reasonable counterplay is always the key here. Here's an obstacle, and you can do nothing about it because your skill is on cooldown. Yeah, that sucks. When there's nothing that you can do, that sucks. But here's an obstacle, and you can work around it or otherwise actively play the game to overcome it. You know, that's actual gameplay. But being put in the timeout box, that is not fun or engaging gameplay. I always use the D&D example of spells that produce stun effects. As a DM, I never use those against players, because it's just super unfun. Player gets to make a die roll. If he fails a die roll, then his turn is just skipped. And what's the point? Players want to do that against the monsters, that's one thing. But players play games to play the game, not to sit around doing nothing. Then I've also seen some players complaining about running out of Forgotten Souls before running out of other crafting materials. There's a big imbalance. To help out there, Helltide chests seem like a great way to farm up Forgotten Souls. Then a recurring complaint from past seasons is a desire to be able to level up glyphs in more than just the pit. Now, I am generally in favor of there being more than one way to farm up everything, right? Like, whatever it is you want to do in the game, having at least 2 activities to get there, even if one is less efficient than the other, I'm very much in favor of that. However, the system that we now have for leveling up glyphs kind of means that we're locked to the pit, because your glyph level and your ability to level up your glyph is tied to pit level, right? Like, the higher the pit level, the greater your odds of leveling up your glyph. If we still have the system that we used to have, where you would get glyph XP, then yeah, you can kind of implement that anywhere else. And personally, I preferred the glyph XP system. But now, with what we have, like, the devs kind of painted themselves into a corner there. Something else that keeps coming up, allowing us to stack more than 10 whispers before turn-in. Back at launch, it took a long time to collect 10 whispers. Now you can do it in a few minutes. Now, it's definitely great that they added the Raven of the Tree to cities so that we don't have to return to the Tree of Whispers for turn-ins, but it still interrupts gameplay flow of a Helltide run, right? You finish your whispers, you don't want to stop the Helltide, right? You're chaining Blood Maidens, there's so much fun gameplay going on, but you have to stop because, oh, well, I'm going to accidentally complete another whisper, and then it's going to go to waste. Another small thing, and this is really minute in the grand scale of everything else we're talking about, the icons for stash tabs would be nice to have more of them, or more customization of the existing ones, like to change their color or something. I personally find myself picking random icons that have basically nothing to do with what I'm actually using them for. So at a glance, I can't even really recognize, like, well, what was this one? I don't know. Now, as for my own personal experience, I've clocked about 40 hours of game time so far this season. And I've been doing it self-found, not solo. I've been playing with a group, but I'm self-found, meaning I don't trade. I also don't accept handouts from people playing with me or anything. Don't accept any items from my party mates. And that's because I want to know what the experience is for the average player. And in my 40 hours, I've found, as well as randomly crafted, a few mythic uniques, though only one that my build needs. I did find myself using a Tyrael's Might when my build calls for a Shroud, right? No build guide is going to recommend Tyrael's Might. But honestly, I kind of like it. I like that I didn't get what I wanted, but I still got something good that I managed to work into my build. You know, maybe one day I'll get the Shroud and I will replace the Tyrael's, but in the meantime, thanks to the Tyrael's, you know, Tyrael's Might gives you so much defense, I'm able to offload some other defensive stats in my Paragon, you know, and build more damage there instead of getting the resistance nodes. Now, note that I said randomly crafted mythics, because I am convinced that for the average self-found player, it is just about impossible to farm up the legendary runes needed to craft what you desire. Now again, I'm saying average, right? Like, if you're a grinder, you're gonna do it, right? You know, I've already put in 40 hours. By the end of the season, I'm definitely gonna get everything that I need to do it. But average player who doesn't have that much time to play, it's unreasonable. It's not gonna happen. As of now, 40 hours in, I don't even have 6 of any legendary rune, let alone 6 of the legendary runes that I need for the mythic that I want. I don't even have all the legendary runes that my build needs, like in the max roll build guide. And to clarify, I don't think this rarity is inherently a problem, but it really does highlight how, for a player who uses a trade website, this is a non-issue. You just sell runes that you don't need and buy the ones you do, and bam, you instantly get the mythic that you want. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. But if you don't trade, it is basically impossible. And this may be by design to replicate how runes form the basis of trade in Diablo 2. Now, one thing I'm really not fond of is the system that randomly turns 3 runes into another rune, especially because you are not guaranteed to get a rune of a higher tier rarity. In fact, you're more likely to not upgrade a rarity. So this really just feels like a way to burn through all of your runes rather quickly, when you could instead just trade those runes for deterministic reward, right? Get a bunch of gold, as opposed to gambling and almost always ending up vastly poorer than when you started, which is the current system. I really prefer Diablo 2's deterministic rune crafting, right? 3 of 1 rune, always upgraded into another rune. There was a simple ladder of rune upgrades to follow. Now, D2 runes were far more rare than D4 runes, but maybe some happy middle ground between these two systems can be found so that I don't just feel like I'm throwing away dozens of runes while praying to get the rune that I want. It just feels so wasteful. Now, I see some people ask for an in-game trade house, and I still don't know how I feel about that. I don't want to trade. I don't like trading. Currently, I do not trade because there is no trade house in the game, and going to a website to message some guy asking for an item and then friending him in-game and doing all that crap is just, it's such an unpleasant experience to me that I'd rather be weaker than engage in trade. But if the trade house was in-game and it was convenient to use, then yeah, I would always be trading to get the stuff I want because it is a far more optimal way to play the game. But it would hurt my enjoyment of the game because I like when my items come from drops. I don't get dopamine hits through a trade house. But what do you folks think? Do you want a trade house in D4 or not? And of course, you know, in no part of this discussion ever is anyone going to advocate for a real money trade house. So don't worry about that. We're talking about strictly gold trade house. Sound off in the comments. Now, at the end of this week, we got patch notes for a patch dropping on July 15th. We're seeing some buffs to underperforming skills and classes, though generally only in the 20% range, so I don't expect any meta shakeups from this. Barbarians get the biggest buffs, sometimes up to 50% buffs for some skills, which is nice, given I ranked Barbarians in last place in my class tier list. Do be sure to have seen that video. Maybe with these changes, we'll bring them up to D or even C tier, but I don't expect it to allow them to reach parity with the other classes. The Druid is getting a buff to Pulverize, which I found surprising, given Pulverize is already on my top 10 builds list. But the best news, Arcana now gets picked up automatically. We complained about that last week. Great quality of life change here. Also, completion rewards for Legion events now include more salvage materials and Forgotten Souls in Torment difficulties. So, for those complaining about too few Forgotten Souls, now you can try out Legion events as a source, and I'm just glad to see Legion events being made relevant again. Also, Heraldric chests in Nightmare Dungeons with the Heraldric Materials Reserve affix, they will now award more salvage materials and Forgotten Souls. So the devs definitely saw that people were running out of Forgotten Souls, or that people were complaining about it at least, and are giving us more ways to farm them. Also, last week we complained about the XP globes from the Forgotten Wisdom Nightmare Dungeon affix. They're fixing that as well. It's basically like they're fixing everything we've complained about in the last week. So, with the next patch coming up on Tuesday, those XP globes will split their XP between party members. And they're also fixing an issue where the ether count in Infernal Hordes would not appear if the player entered from a Heraldric Strongroom. Now, I'm not convinced personally that bug only happened to me from a Heraldric Strongroom. I'm pretty sure anytime I entered Infernal Hordes that was happening, but hey, we'll find out on Tuesday. Now, how are you folks feeling about Season 9? We're a week in. Have you already abandoned it? Are you happy with the upcoming balance and bug changes? Sound off in the comments. Because over in Path of Exile news, we finally have a date. Patch 0.3.0 for PoE 2 is dropping on August 29th. GGG releases major updates every 4 months. Last one was in April, so yeah, timeline checks out. And yes, the patch will bring a new league, which means a fresh economy, new rewards, new bosses, new crafting options, and of course a brand new combat mechanic. The announcement for what all that content includes will come about a week before launch. Now, Act 4 is looking very likely to drop with 0.3. This comes from GGG's recent comment that removing cruel difficulty is coming sooner than you think. Now, based on things GGG has already said, plus, if you look at the official art book that came with a supporter pack, Act 4 looks like it'll include multiple Kaurai Islands, as well as King's March. We'll get a new Ascendancy trial that may be related to PoE 1's Trial of the Ancestors League. Meanwhile, for a lot of players who returned to PoE 1 with the new league, they were reminded of how great PoE 1's mapping system is, and how PoE 2's isn't quite hitting the mark in the same way yet. The fully procedurally generated atlas, right, extending forever in all directions, it can kind of feel directionless. And not being able to properly juice your maps until you've navigated your way to a tower with the right placement of maps around it, it's just a lot more setup to get to running juiced maps than in PoE 1. Plus, the system is almost at odds with itself. It wants you to stick around towers to run the maps you've juiced, but it also wants you to go out and keep exploring to find citadels. Now, personally, I still think PoE 2's mapping system is very interesting, and we have to keep in mind that it does not have 10 years of features added to it the way PoE 1's mapping system does. Still, I can understand why some people prefer PoE 1's system. Then we got some interesting information from an interview between Jonathan Rogers and Chinese media. First off, yes, Chinese servers are getting a full split from international servers, complete with dedicated dev teams and exclusive content. These servers will have full Chinese voiceovers, and if PoE 1 is anything to go by, it's going to have its own monetization model and some game elements tailored to regional preferences. So like anime pets, auto loot, likely to be censored undead content. Now, this will be a bit of a blow to PoE 2's trade scene. Chinese players seem to make up a lot of the trade market, and they're also generally some of the most well-mannered traders. But hey, PoE 1's trade scene gets by just fine. But back to the patch. 0.3 is targeting build diversity in a big way. GGG's looking to buff underused ascendancies and skills, but fair warning, this might come at the cost of some current meta builds falling off. They're also working on a new crafting tutorial early in the campaign. They're looking to rebalance XP gains from level 95 to 99. They're also overhauling unused crafting systems, like essences might be getting a rework soon. They're also addressing performance concerns. They're working on a new system to prioritize the core parts of skill visuals and dynamically cull the rest. So it's a fix aimed squarely at keeping performance smooth when there's a lot of flashy effects going off at once. And honestly, this needs to come to PoE 1 as soon as possible. And if they're making it for PoE 2, I'm sure it's going to come to PoE 1. Now, a training dummy is something people have been asking for a while to measure our DPS. Now, instead of that, what they're working on is an enhancement to the pause feature where you can mouse over monsters and see damage simulation numbers against that monster. So that's neat. They also said a damage log is on the long-term wish list, so you can, find out what killed you. Now, for the Duelist fans out there, bad news. GGG confirmed that Duelist and Swords were among the last things added in development, so they likely won't be in 0.3. They did promise, though, that PoE 2 will not release without Swords. Now, what are your expectations for PoE 2's 0.3 launch? Drop your thoughts below. Because we're moving on to some Subnautica news. And, hoo boy, strap in for some industry drama. Subnautica 2 has been delayed. And not just by a little. Publisher Krafton now says the sequel will not launch until 2026. But this isn't just a needs more polish kind of delay. Behind the scenes, it's turned into a full-on corporate soap opera. But let's rewind. Subnautica was a surprise indie hit in 2018, selling over 6 million copies and building a passionate fan base. Krafton bought the developer Unknown Worlds for a whopping $500 million in 2021. Kind of a crazy amount of money. And part of the deal included an additional $250 million payout, but only if certain revenue targets were hit by the end of 2025. So fast forward to now, and Krafton has removed, i.e. fired, the original 3 founders, Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and CEO Ted Gill. So they fired those guys, and they've delayed the game to 2026 against the explicit wishes of the founders who wanted to release in 2025. So this led to fan outrage as a pretty clear narrative was emerging. Krafton must have fired the original founders and delayed the game to 2026 to save $250 million, right? Because they're not going to meet the 2025 deadline, therefore they're not going to hit the 2025 targets to earn the bonus payout. And that bonus payout would have taken the form of bonuses to the developers at Unknown Worlds. So Subnautica fans started to call for boycotts of Subnautica 2. At which point, Krafton, the evil corporation looking to deprive the devs of their hard-earned bonuses, in a very uncharacteristic manner for a big corporation, went ahead and just put the original 3 founders on blast. First off, they clarified that of the $250 million bonuses, the agreement was 90% of that was going to the 3 founders, with only 10% going to the rest of the team, which allegedly was 100 people. And Krafton expected the founders to work hard to earn those bonuses. But, quote, regrettably, the former leadership abandoned the responsibilities entrusted to them. Subnautica 2 was originally planned for an early access launch in early 2024, but the timeline has since been significantly delayed. Krafton made multiple requests to Charlie and Max to resume their roles as game director and technical director respectively, but both declined to do so, in particular, following the failure of Moonbreaker, another game the devs made and Krafton published. Krafton asked Charlie to devote himself to the development of Subnautica 2. However, instead of participating in the game development, he chose to focus on a personal film project. Krafton believes that the absence of core leadership has resulted in repeated confusion in direction and significant delays in the overall project schedule. The current early access version also falls short in terms of content volume. We are deeply disappointed by the former leadership's conduct, and above all, we feel a profound sense of betrayal by their failure to honor the trust placed in them by our fans. To uphold our commitment to provide you with the best possible gaming experience, we made the difficult yet necessary decision to change the executive leadership. Additionally, Krafton has committed to fair and equitable compensation for all remaining Unknown Worlds employees who have continuously and tirelessly contributed to Subnautica 2's development. We believe that the dedication and effort of this team are at the very heart of Subnautica's ongoing evolution, and we reaffirm our commitment to provide the rewards they were promised. Wow, big companies rarely so directly attack people because they open themselves up to being sued for libel. So either Krafton has balls of steel, or they have ironclad proof to back up their claims in court. I mean, Krafton even publicly called a game that they published a failure, which is another rarity for a publisher to admit, which gives them points for honesty. And if you look into Charlie Cleveland, you do see that he is working on a personal film and a podcast to promote that film, which, by the way, has nothing to do with Subnautica. It's a Christmas movie. Now, the story doesn't end there. After this statement, Charlie and the other two founders have filed a lawsuit against Krafton, but not for libel or for defamation, but rather for breach of contract. We don't have the details yet, but if I had to guess, it probably involves roughly $250 million. Charlie also posted a statement on Reddit saying, quote, "As I wrote last week, we know in our souls that the game is ready for early access. We've now filed a lawsuit against Krafton. The details should eventually become public. You all deserve the full story. As for the earnout, the idea that Max, Ted, and I wanted to keep it all for ourselves is totally untrue. Historically, we've always shared our profits with the team and did the same when we sold the studio. You can be damn sure we'll continue with the earnout bonus as well." So to clarify here, contractually, 90% was going to those three. He's claiming that when they would get that, they would then disseminate it, I guess, however they want it amongst the rest of the employees. But the 90-10 split was what was contractually agreed to. Now, either way, this whole mess leaves Subnautica 2 in a very weird place. The original vision is now in the hands of new leadership. The release is delayed until at least 2026. A lawsuit is brewing, the fan base is divided, and somewhere out there, the creator of Subnautica is working on a Christmas movie with AI-generated posters. Yeah, go check out his website. I'm not even kidding. Now, lastly, we'll talk about the Stop Killing Games initiative. This is the latest consumer movement that's making big publishers sweat through their Gucci suits. This EU citizen initiative has now topped 1.3 million signatures, which was enough to trigger a formal response from Video Games Europe, a name that sounds very official, but when you actually look into who these people are, they're actually just a lobbying group representing all the usual suspects: EA, Activision, Ubisoft, Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, Epic, Square Enix. Basically, if they've sold you a loot box, they're probably in this group. And the funniest thing is, most of these companies are not even European. Stop Killing Games has a simple goal: to ensure that the games we pay for don't become inaccessible once devs shut down the servers. The campaign is not asking for companies to keep servers running until the end of time. It's asking for end-of-life plans that preserve access, or at least allow for community-hosted private servers once official ones go offline. Now, in their response, Video Games Europe argued, quote, "Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create." So, first off, pretty sure devs are not held responsible for what happens on private servers. These are non-issues. Private servers already exist for games like World of Warcraft. Servers have run for years and years and years, and shockingly, they're doing just fine without dev administration. And how would this be making it prohibitively expensive to create these video games? What are the prohibitive expenses associated with a simple off switch for the DRM, or a plan to release like the game's source code or whatever data you need to release once you turn off the servers and you stop selling the game and making any profit off of it, just letting players have that data so that they can build their own servers? Also, the initiative is not asking for any retroactive action to be taken to existing games. It's just asking that new games be developed with proper sunset plans, like allowing community-run servers. But I guess it's unreasonably expensive to ensure consumer protection, right? But what do you folks think? Should companies be forced to preserve access to the games we buy, or is it really unreasonable to ask that devs do this? Sound off in the comments. Because that's going to wrap up this week's video, folks, but do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed my initial review of Diablo 4 Season 9. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.